Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I've been living in Tokyo for the past year, and one thing you quickly learn here is that bicycles are a big deal. You can't just leave your bike anywhere. You have to pay for parking, usually around 200 to 400 yen per day. Free parking spots for bikes are as rare as snow in summer. Most people, including me, opt for monthly parking because it's cheaper and you get your own designated space. This whole mess started about a month ago. Someone in my apartment complex began having a regular visitor who decided my bike parking space was up for grabs whenever they came around. Sometimes they'd stay overnight, forcing me to park at the station for 200 yen and trudge home on foot. This meant I'd have to wake up earlier the next day and lug my heavy work bag on a 20-minute walk to the station. Talk about inconvenient. All the bike spaces have numbers showing they're reserved. Mine is 105, but this jerk kept helping themselves to it. The second time it happened, I complained to the building manager, Tanaka-san. "I'm sorry to hear that, Smith-san," he said, bowing slightly. "I'll look into it." But nothing changed. The third time I spotted that flashy red bike in my spot, I left a note in Japanese. "Please don't park here. This is my reserved space that I use daily. Thank you for your understanding." The next day, I found my note taped to my parking space with some choice words scrawled at the bottom. This guy wasn't just stealing my spot, he was mocking me with insults. "Fine," I muttered. "If that's how you want to play it." I probably would have let it slide if not for those insults. But that really got under my skin and brought out my petty side. This happened a few more times over the next couple of weeks, and I knew it wouldn't stop unless I did something. I'd been thinking about upgrading my bike anyway, something better for weekend cycling trips, so I headed to the local bike shop and picked out a new ride, along with the thickest chain and lock they had in stock. "Planning to keep your bike safe, eh?" the shopkeeper chuckled. "Oh, you have no idea," I replied with a smirk. The next time I saw that red bike in my spot, I put my new lock to use, on his bike. For the next week, that fancy bicycle didn't budge an inch. 2 notes appeared during that time. The first was aggressive, full of threats about calling the police. Go ahead, I thought. I'd love to see how that plays out. The second note, a few days later, was a complete 180. It was an apology, begging me to unlock the bike. Apparently, they'd tried to break the lock but couldn't manage it. Lesson learned, I hope, I said to myself, feeling a mix of satisfaction and amusement. I'm pretty sure they won't try this again, but I want to savor this victory for a bit longer. I'll probably free the bike in another day or two. After all, I'm not completely heartless. As I walked past the still-chained bike this morning, Tanaka-san approached me. "Smith-san, have you noticed any unusual activity in the bike parking area lately?" I gave him my best innocent look. "Nothing out of the ordinary, Tanaka-san. Why do you ask?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No reason. Just checking. Have a good day." I nodded and continued on my way, suppressing a grin. Sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands to get results. And in this case, it seems like my little parking space problem has been solved. At least for now. The next one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd have to deal with entitled neighbors after leaving the military, but here I am. Let me tell you about the time my next-door Karen tried to take over my property and business, not realizing she was messing with a veteran who knew a thing or two about following rules to the letter. I served in the Army for 12 years before retiring due to an injury. When I got out, I used my savings and some VA loans to buy a nice piece of land on the outskirts of town. It was about 5 acres, enough space to build a house and set up a small landscaping business I'd been dreaming about. I figured it would be a good way to stay active and put my skills to use. For the first couple years, everything was great. I built up my client base, hired a few guys to help out, and started turning a decent profit. My neighbor to the left was an older couple who kept to themselves. But then Karen and her family moved in on the right. At first, they seemed nice enough. Karen would wave as she drove by, and her kids would sometimes play with my dog when he was in the front yard. But things started to change when my business really took off. See, I had a few work trucks and trailers that I'd park on my property overnight. They were all neatly lined up on the side of my house, not visible from the road. But Karen could see them from her second-story window, and apparently, that was a problem. One day, she marched over while I was loading up for a job. "Excuse me," she said in that tone that makes you want to roll your eyes. "I need to talk to you about all these vehicles." I tried to be polite. "Sure, what's up?" "Well, this is a residential area, not a commercial zone. You can't run a business out of your home like this. It's bringing down our property values." I blinked at her. "Ma'am, this is my private property. I'm not violating any zoning laws or homeowner association rules. There aren't even any homeowner associations out here." She huffed. "Well, there should be. I'm gonna start one." and then we'll see about getting rid of this eyesore. I just shook my head and went back to work. I figured she was all talk. Boy, was I wrong. Over the next few months, Karen went on a crusade. She tried to rally the other neighbors against me, claimed my business was disrupting the peace, and even called the police a couple times reporting suspicious activity when my guys showed up early for work. Each time, I calmly explained the situation to the officers, showed them my permits and licenses, and they left without issue. But Karen wasn't giving up. One day, I came home to find her in my driveway with a man in a suit. "This is Mr. Johnson," she said smugly. "He's a real estate lawyer. We're here to discuss your situation." I crossed my arms. "What situation would that be?" Mr. Johnson cleared his throat. "Well, sir, it seems you're operating a commercial enterprise in a residential zone. Mrs. Karen here has brought this to our attention, and we're prepared to take legal action if necessary." I couldn't help but laugh. "With all due respect, you might want to check your facts before making threats. This property is zoned for mixed use. I have all the proper permits and licenses, but please go ahead and try to sue me. I could use a good laugh." Karen's face turned red. "You can't talk to us like that. We'll see about this." She stormed off, the lawyer trailing behind her, looking confused. I thought that would be the end of it, but Karen had one more trick up her sleeve. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from some organization calling itself the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association. The letter stated that I was in violation of several homeowner association rules and had 30 days to cease all business operations or face fines and legal action. There was just one problem. I wasn't part of any homeowner association. Neither were most of my neighbors. I did some digging and found out that Karen had indeed started an homeowner association, with herself as president. She'd gotten a few of the newer residents to join, but most of us old-timers wanted nothing to do with it. Now, I could have just ignored the letter. But something in me snapped. I was tired of Karen's games, and I decided it was time for some malicious compliance. I called up my buddy Mike, who's a lawyer specializing in property law. I explained the situation, and he was more than happy to help out. We spent the next few days going over every detail of Karen's so-called homeowner association. Turns out she'd made a lot of mistakes. The homeowner association wasn't properly registered with the state, the bylaws were full of contradictions, and she hadn't followed the correct procedures for notifying homeowners or holding elections. But the biggest mistake? She'd included my property in the homeowner association's coverage area without my consent. Mike helped me draft a response letter. We stated that while I wasn't a member of the homeowner association, I would be happy to comply with their request to cease business operations on the property. However, since they claimed authority over my land, I would be turning over all business assets, including equipment, client lists, and outstanding contracts, to the homeowner association, effective immediately. We also included an invoice for the fair market value of my business, which came to just over $500,000. I hand-delivered the letter to Karen's house and waited. 2 days later, she was pounding on my door, waving the letter. "What is this nonsense?" she shrieked. "We don't want your business." I shrugged. "But you said I had to cease operations. I'm just complying with your demands. Of course, if you'd rather not take over, we could always go back to the way things were." "You can't do this!" she yelled. "This isn't what we meant." "Well," I said calmly, "you should have thought of that before trying to claim authority over property that isn't yours. Now, you have two choices. Either back off and disband this illegal homeowner association, or prepare to take over a $500,000 landscaping business. Your call." Karen stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, she turned and stormed off without another word. The next day, I got a visit from Mr. Johnson, the lawyer. He looked uncomfortable as he handed me a document. "This is a formal retraction of all claims made by the, Lakeside Estates Homeowner Association," he said. "They've agreed to disband the organization and will not pursue any further action against you or your business." I couldn't help but smile. "That's mighty kind of them. I trust this is the end of the matter?" He nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. And, for what it's worth, I apologize for my part in this. I should have done more due diligence." I waved it off. "No hard feelings, just doing your job." After he left, I called Mike to give him the good news. We had a good laugh about the whole thing. For the next few weeks, things were quiet. Karen avoided me like the plague, and I went about my business as usual. But then, one sunny Saturday morning, I heard a knock at my door. It was Karen, looking sheepish. I owe you an apology," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I was out of line, and I'm sorry." I leaned against the doorframe, considering her words. "Apology accepted," I said finally. "But I hope you've learned something from all this." She nodded. "I have, and I was wondering if maybe you could use some help with your business. I used to do bookkeeping, and I thought—" I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the offer. "Tell you what," I said. "Why don't you come by the office next week? We'll talk about it." Karen's face lit up. "Really? Thank you. I promise you won't regret it." As she walked away, I shook my head, chuckling to myself. Life sure has a way of surprising you. Who knows? Maybe Karen and I would end up being good neighbors after all. In the end, I learned that sometimes the best way to deal with entitled people is to give them exactly what they ask for, even if it's not what they really want. And hey, if you can teach them a lesson, and maybe even make a friend in the process, well, that's just the icing on the cake. The next one is a petty revenge story. After several checks, it was confirmed I had cancer and had to be in hospital for a while. I worked in recruitment, and to my knowledge, to my face, in calls to me anyway, my company was supportive of my battle. Whilst at home recovering from an op that I had to have to remove the cancer and to help with recovery, I kept on working, kept up with my clients, etc. Even though I took 3 months off unpaid leave, I just wanted to show my company that although I was off, like I asked for cancer or something, and also wanted to show them that I was grateful of their support and understanding of what I was going through. During this time, I made several high-profile placements, and due to most having long notice periods, technical directors, etc., they wouldn't start for a few months, and we invoice bill clients on start date. The pipeline I had generated was worth $200,000 in a single month, which was the highest ever in the 10-year history of the company. A very good month would be about $20K, $30K generated. When I came back, I had a meeting with the director, and I was about to thank him for his support, etc., and to excitedly tell him about my pipeline. However, before I could, he said he was happy I was healthy. However, he had to put me on performance review for missing a critical time in the business and for not hitting my targets. I looked at him and said, "As you know, I had cancer and also took the time off as unpaid." Director: "Yes, however, not meeting KPIs while still employed by us means I have to do this to be fair to others in the team." I looked at him shocked, but then did the math in my head and just said, "Okay." Now it takes about 30 days for payment to hit our accounts, so I bid my time. That week, the first batch of my new placements dropped. I quietly invoiced. The next week, more followed. Third week, our division had our monthly meeting where we each have to share the pipeline for that month. It got to me, and I said, "I'm currently on $161,000 and have another $40,000 pending." You should have seen his face. His boss was at that meeting also. Most of my team knew what had happened to me and had my back and smirked. We got paid commission monthly, and I knew I had another 5 weeks before these would be paid out. So I just quietly worked, and luckily was also approached by one of my internal clients that wanted me to come work internally for them. I am actually still with them to this day. As soon as that wedge of commission dropped, I called a meeting with the director. He was all smiles and said, "OP, I knew there would be no hard feelings about having to put you on performance review, and we are taking you off it. I see now it was completely unnecessary." I told him thanks, but I was giving him my notice. I said that, having gone through the stress of what I had to go through, really made me think what was important at the end of the day. He and his boss apparently did not know about the performance review, don't know if true or not, tried to make me stay by offering raises and promotions, etc. I, of course, refused. A couple of people I know are still there, and to this day, my record of highest biller in that company still stands. The next one is a malicious compliance story. When I was in college, I worked nights as a housekeeper in the local hospital. The hospital had a cafeteria that closed at 8 p.m. and a snack bar that only closed from midnight until 1 a.m. It was always a bear to clean, and the floors were the worst part. Once a week, some guys would come in and make the most amazing omelets. 10 times as many people came on omelet night, and I couldn't start cleaning up until they left at 12:30 a.m. This gave me only 30 minutes to clean. To help me out, one of the floor crew guys helped me stack the tables and chair, quickly sweep up the crap on the floor with his humongous dust mop, and then he drove his riding floor cleaner. We called it the Zamboni. And floors were done in 10 minutes. He didn't have to do this, and I was grateful every time he did. 2 years later, he retired, and I got the job driving the Zamboni. I loved that job and was always ahead of schedule. Since that was the case, I decided to help out the new hire girl who was now in charge of the snack bar cleaning. We got along great, and I really felt like I was helping out. Boy, was I wrong. I'm a large man, 6'2" and 250 pounds. I'm also a combat vet, and despite being a big teddy bear, as my wife calls me, some people are intimidated by me. I get to work one evening, and my boss calls me into the office. It's the first time I 2.5 years that he ever has. He asks me about my relationship with the new girl who cleans the snack bar. I relate how I was always grateful when my predecessor had helped me with it, so I tried to pass it along. I asked why. She had filed a complaint against me for sexual harassment. I was stunned. This lady, who was old enough to be my mother, said that I sought her out every night and forced her to talk to me for 15 minutes or more every night, and she feared for her safety. It was inconceivable to me. She never acted at all intimidated, and our conversations centered around our jobs, kids, etc. Normal work talk. My manager advised me to stay away from her and not to speak with her again. Cue malicious compliance. That night was omelet night. I usually didn't get one because I was always cleaning up after them and didn't have the time, but tonight I was famished and ordered two. I sat there eating them with my trainer, who was a sweet old lady my grandma's age. I had, of course, bought her an omelet as well. We ate and got up just as the omelet guys were leaving. The place was a mess. On our way out, the new girl asked me when I would bring the Zamboni by to clean up the floor. I just kept walking as though she wasn't there. As I did, my trainer told her, "Oh, he's not allowed to do that for you anymore." New girl said, "But it's his job." That's when my trainer let her know in the sweetest old grandma way that it had never been my job, but instead was just me trying to help her. Now, however, I was supposed to avoid speaking to her at all costs, so I would never be doing that again. I didn't stick around to watch her reaction, but my trainer said she almost cried when the trainer told her, "What did you expect when you threw a good young man under the bus?" Learned a couple weeks later that she was after my spot on floor crew and thought her accusations would get me fired. I ended up changing jobs 3 months later. I heard through my friends that she tried to get my spot on floor crew and made a big stink when she didn't get the job. She quit shortly after that. It still hurts my heart a little when I think that she would do that to a 23-year-old kid with a family. Thank God I had managers who trusted me. The next one is an entitled people's story. Remembered this story the other day after said coworker started meddling around with it once again. Hope I don't make it too complicated or long. Lots of details, unfortunately. First, a little background. I work at an indoor pool, and we have an attraction that we run every 30 minutes. Due to the attraction being potentially dangerous, especially to elderly people, we have a PA system in place to ring a bell in the hall as a warning. Once the bell rings, our guests have 2 minutes to get to safety or leave the pool while we lower the water level. Now, the building is old. The speaker system is an old 100V system, and the original amplifier for it is long gone, so things are wired up a little hacky with the new modern amplifier. This means every room in the building has its own channel we can turn on or off, but all are fed from the same input. Our boss is not a monster and knows things can get boring or exhausting depending on the season, so they added a small web radio to the PA system so we can have radio, and because we are all nice and friendly, we can also turn on the audio channel for the entrance so the cashiers can have some music as well. The only problem here is, though, that volume can vary a lot due to the way the system works. One zone has 15 speakers, while another zone only has 3. But the amp sends the same voltage to both zones, so one zone will have normal audio, and the next will be too loud. I think you can see where this is going. Now, that day the swim hall was full, people were noisy, and therefore we had to up the volume for the bell to be audible to our guest. Literally what the system was meant for. Fortunately, though, volume was fine for our little booth, so we had the correct volume for the hall, and could still enjoy some music. Along comes EC. Entitled cashier. She comes into our booth, complains that she's bored, and turns on the channel for the entrance. We had that one turned off because the entrance has probably the least amount of speakers, so the radio would be quite loud there. So we slightly lowered the overall master volume to accommodate for it. Unfortunately, at this point the radio is non-audible in our booth because the volume is so low. So when we rang the bell over the PA, we noticed you couldn't hear it in the swim hall at all, so we had to increase the volume and left it at that higher level. After the attraction ran, we were back in our booth. In comes EC and complains the radio is way too loud and goes to our PA system to lower the volume. Now, I want to mention I'm only 26 years old and she's in her 60s, but considering the hierarchy, I'm the one in control of the PA system since it's safety-relevant equipment for the pool, not entertainment. And I do take that safety equipment seriously after we had elderly people drown because they didn't hear the bell. It's already too quiet, especially in here. You can't lower it further, I say to nail down that the volume is in fact pretty low already and that I don't want it to be lower. So what, you have phones, you can make radio yourself, she says with that smug face, which pissed me off. In our little booth there is no Wi-Fi and we have no mobile data signal at all. Meanwhile, the entrance hall has a public Wi-Fi access point that she always uses to watch TikTok videos. We can also turn off your channel. You have a phone too, you can make your own radio as well, I say. She looks at me pissed and storms off. Later that day, EC went to my boss and complained that I refused to let her have music. My boss then reminded her that the company is not paying the royalty licenses to play radio in public, so she wasn't allowed to have radio in the entrance in the first place. Though we handle this pretty easy usually, since nobody is gonna realistically file a lawsuit over it unless it's too loud. EC recently, though, started pulling the same crap, coming into our booth and lowering the volume repeatedly while we aren't there. We noticed after we rang the bell repeatedly and every time had to increase the volume. Boss reminded EC the other day that the license for playing radio in public is about $2.400, which the company will have her pay as she is the one that turned it on. EC is highly entitled and considers herself to be higher in the hierarchy than me due to being in the company longer. That may be true, but the PA system is still not for entertainment purposes. It's my responsibility, and I'm not gonna break the amplifier by increasing and decreasing volume over and over just because she's bored and can't be bothered to use her own phone. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.